What really happened behind closed doors when Heather Locklear filed for divorce? For years, the breakup between Richie Sambora and Heather Locklear was brushed off as just another celebrity divorce. Red carpets faded, headlines moved on, and the real story stayed buried. When Heather filed for divorce, Richie chose silence. No interviews, no explanations, no defense. Until now. At 66, he finally breaks that silence, and what he reveals leaves the world stunned. February 2006 was supposed to be routine. Another day in a life Richie Sambora had spent years navigating between tour buses, recording studios, and packed arenas. Instead, it arrived with a silence so sudden it felt unreal. Headlines across the country announced that Heather Locklear had filed for divorce. Everyone seemed to know, except Richie Sambora himself. Hours after the news broke, Richie spoke briefly to ABC News Radio, stunned and confused. "It's completely untrue," he said at the time. There had been no explosive fight, no final conversation, no warning. His phone hadn't rung. His home felt unchanged. Just weeks earlier, they had celebrated their wedding anniversary and were planning to spend Valentine's Day together. Publicly, they had insisted, the real story is that there is no story. But denial collapsed when Heather's representative confirmed it in a single devastating sentence. After 11 years of marriage, she had filed for divorce. Outwardly, nothing stopped. The band kept playing. The crowds kept cheering. But privately, Richie felt his life split open. Years later, in a rare moment of honesty, he summed it up simply. She took everything. Not money, not property. What vanished was the emotional certainty, the belief that no matter how chaotic his world became, she was the constant he could return to. Their beginning had felt like a fairy tale. Introduced through a mutual friend, makeup artist Lisa Christie, Richie and Heather fell into a whirlwind romance that seemed destined. 7 months later, he proposed, and she said yes. They married quietly at a New Jersey courthouse, then reaffirmed their vows days later in Paris, wrapped in romance and promise. They built a life in Los Angeles, welcomed their daughter Ava Elizabeth in 1997, and for a time, everything felt solid. Richie would later say, "There was never a moment I didn't love her." But Hollywood love is rarely protected from reality. Touring schedules, long separations, and relentless pressure slowly pulled them in different directions. Their home, once a place of refuge, slowly filled with more than furniture and memories. Assistants came and went. Stylists, schedules, and obligations crowded every corner. What disappeared was conversation. They didn't stop speaking because of explosive fights, but because silence became easier. Love was replaced by logistics. Affection turned into appointments. The romance that had once felt timeless in Paris unraveled quietly beneath the tall, guarded walls of Los Angeles, a city built on dreams, but steeped in isolation. Those walls stood still as their connection faded, a love slowly slipping away inside the life they had worked so hard to build. What never disappeared was Richie Sambora's love for Heather Locklear. Even as rumors intensified and the marriage cracked under public scrutiny, Richie never turned against her. He didn't point fingers. He didn't fuel tabloid wars. While their world unraveled, he held onto his feelings quietly, choosing restraint over blame, love over spectacle. Years later, when asked about Heather, his tone softened instantly. "I still love Heather," he told people. "She's the mother of my child. What can you say?" It was a simple sentence, but it carried everything. Affection untouched by time, pain, or separation. Heather had been his anchor from the start. Their bond was never just about fame. It was rooted in understanding, in a connection that existed long before headlines tried to define it. Heather was sharp, fiercely independent, and strong in ways the public admired. But Richie had seen the parts she kept hidden. The vulnerability, the moments when her guard fell. That was the woman he fell for. Not the icon, not the image, but the person who understood him more deeply than anyone else ever had. Still, reality was unforgiving. Their lives were built on unstable ground. Richie lived on the road, immersed in tour schedules, late nights, and the constant pull of the music industry. Heather carried the weight of Hollywood stardom, navigating relentless attention and pressure. Their calendars rarely aligned. Weeks passed with only phone calls and brief check-ins. Rumors grew louder than real conversations. Their daughter, Ava, became the quiet center between two parents drifting apart. Richie was not the reckless figure gossip portrayed. He wasn't unfaithful in the ways tabloids claimed, but emotionally, he was often absent. His heart was there, his presence wasn't. Work consumed him, and private struggles went unspoken. Slowly, the dreams they once shared became separate paths. By the time Heather filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, the words sounded clinical, but they carried years of exhaustion, miscommunication, and distance. Richie would later sum it up with painful honesty. Loving her was never the problem. Everything else was. Fatherhood changed him in ways nothing else ever had. In the middle of a marriage falling apart, one constant remained for Richie Sambora, his daughter, Ava Sambora. Born into a life surrounded by cameras and constant attention, Ava became the one thing that felt real and untouched by chaos. When everything else seemed unstable, she grounded him. She was the quiet truth he held on to when his world felt like it was collapsing. Richie hadn't grown up with a clear model of what fatherhood was supposed to look like. His own childhood was complicated, and years on the road hadn't prepared him for consistency. But when Ava was born, something shifted. He slowed down. He softened. The man who once lived out of hotels and backstage rooms found meaning in school routines, bedtime conversations, and showing up for the ordinary moments that suddenly mattered most. "I would die for her," he once said, words that weren't performative, but defining. When Heather Locklear sought full physical custody during the divorce, Richie didn't turn it into a public battle. There were no dramatic court fights or media campaigns. Quietly, he pushed for joint legal custody, not to win anything, but because he needed to remain present in Ava's life. Years later, when he told a close friend, "She took everything," it wasn't about money or possessions. It was about the life he had lost. But Heather hadn't taken Ava, and that mattered more than anything else. After the divorce, Richie made a deliberate decision to stay close. He bought a home just minutes from Heather's, not for show, but for school drop-offs, shared weekends, and the everyday rhythms of co-parenting. He attended school events, stood beside Ava at public appearances, and tried to offer stability even when his own footing felt uncertain. Fatherhood wasn't just a role he stepped into, it became the foundation on which he rebuilt himself. Then came the scandal that changed the public narrative overnight. Just weeks after the divorce filing, the focus shifted from heartbreak to betrayal. Richie's name appeared in headlines alongside Denise Richards, a woman who had once been close to Heather. What followed was a tabloid firestorm. The story was framed as a love triangle, filled with accusations and moral outrage. Heather was portrayed as the wounded party. Denise was cast as the villain. Richie became the man in the middle, silent, overwhelmed, and judged. Behind the headlines, the reality was messier and far more human. Richie wasn't trying to hurt Heather. He was trying to survive emotional fallout that felt impossible to manage. But public perception had already hardened. An anonymous insider later claimed Denise had encouraged Heather to file for divorce before beginning a relationship with Richie weeks later, fueling speculation of betrayal and ulterior motives. Whether true or not, the damage was done. The judgment was swift, unforgiving, and final. And once again, Richie found himself losing control of the story of his own life. Looking back now, Richie Sambora doesn't hide from his own mistakes. With rare honesty, he has admitted that he made choices he shouldn't have, that he tried to fill an emotional void in the wrong ways. He wasn't trying to replace Heather Locklear or erase the life they once shared. But in searching for comfort, he failed to see how deeply his actions would ripple outward, how many hearts would be bruised along the way. That human complexity was quickly lost in the tabloid frenzy, buried beneath headlines that simplified everything into scandal. As the years passed, the noise faded. Their daughter Ava grew older, becoming a quiet center of gravity as public attention drifted elsewhere. Richie retreated into music, rebuilding himself through work. Heather, meanwhile, largely disappeared from view, choosing privacy over visibility. It seemed for a time that the worst was behind them. Then came 2018. The headlines returned, darker than before. Reports of arrests, hospitalizations, and an overdose shocked the public. An emergency call from Heather's own home forced the world to confront a reality far removed from red carpets and magazine covers. This wasn't celebrity drama. It was a deeply personal crisis unfolding in plain sight. Through it all, Richie didn't exploit the moment. He didn't give interviews or trade accusations. Instead, he showed up quietly. In one deeply personal gesture, he flew a fighter jet over Heather's house, marked with her initials, a wordless message of support that cut through the noise. Beyond that, he worked behind the scenes, helping assemble doctors and specialists, acting not as an ex-husband, but as a father and a man who still cared. "I will, of course, always be there for Heather and especially Ava," he later said. "I'm proud of my daughter for her strength." Legally, he owed nothing. Emotionally, he chose to stay. Heather was more than a former partner. She was the mother of his child, someone who had once been his entire world. That devotion to family had already shaped one of the hardest decisions of his life. In 2013, Richie walked away from Bon Jovi at the height of their success, not out of anger, but necessity. In the Hulu documentary, Thank You Good Night, he later admitted he felt emotionally exhausted and unsupported while trying to juggle family crises and fatherhood. Leaving the band meant giving up the road, but gaining presence at home. He chose dance recitals over tour buses, Halloween nights over stadium lights. While fans and critics debated his absence, Richie was rebuilding quietly. And when Heather's struggles became public once again, he chose the same response he had learned to trust most: silence. That silence wasn't avoidance, it was protection. Amid speculation and judgment, Richie Sambora refused to turn a private pain into public spectacle. To some, it looked like withdrawal. To those who knew him, it was restraint, the last form of loyalty he could offer when words would only do harm. Richie knew his silence was never about fear. To him, it was protection. Looking back, Richie Sambora has said there is a clear line between defending yourself and hurting someone else, and he refused to cross it. He chose not to speak because he didn't want to deepen Heather Locklear's pain. It wasn't weakness. It was a deliberate sacrifice, carrying the weight of rumors rather than using words that could wound someone he once loved. He understood that speaking doesn't always heal. Sometimes it only causes more damage. But silence came with its own cost. Without his voice, the public filled in the blanks. Gossip hardened into truth. Richie was recast as careless, cold, and indifferent, a man who walked away without remorse. None of it reflected reality, but the story stuck, etched permanently into public perception. Still, he remained quiet. For Ava, for Heather, for the remains of a bond that had shaped a significant part of his life. And in that quiet, something unexpected happened. The silence didn't break him. It reshaped him. He became more reflective, more patient, more aware that love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes the deepest form of love is the one no one hears. Fame, he came to realize, magnifies everything. The glamour distracts. But underneath it lies pressure, isolation, and damage that often goes unseen. Heather's struggles were never sudden. He had witnessed the shifts, the unpredictable mood changes, the moments when brightness gave way to darkness. In private, he saw fear behind her eyes, especially when the noise of Hollywood faded and she was left alone with her thoughts. Addiction and mental illness were forces he wasn't equipped to fight. He wasn't a doctor. He was a partner trying to understand something that had no clear language. He later admitted that helplessness haunted him most. She was hurting, and he didn't know how to save her. The regret in that realization lingered long after the marriage ended. Her unraveling wasn't dramatic. It was slow, gradual, hidden beneath makeup, applause, and practiced smiles, and caught in his own relentless cycle of touring, work, and personal struggles, Richie didn't fully grasp how far she was slipping until it was already too late. For years, he avoided talking about how it ended. But now, at 66, there is calm where there was once confusion. He has said plainly that he didn't leave Heather, she left him. And for a long time, he couldn't understand why. When the divorce was filed, he was away on tour. There was no fight he could point to, no final argument. The news came not from her, but through others, like a sudden rupture in reality. With distance and time, his understanding softened. They hadn't stopped caring, he believes. They stopped showing up. They were still married in name, but already far apart in spirit. He doesn't frame Heather as the villain of the story. Instead, he sees her as someone drowning, and the divorce, he now believes, was her way of reaching for air.